the Triathlon Show 276. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and on today's episode I interview Emma Carney. Emma is a double ITU world champion back in the mid-90s when she really was dominating women's triathlon. She's a World Triathlon Hall of Fame inductee, and now she is coaching both at a high performance level back home in Australia and also coaching age groupers. Before we get into the interview with Emma, big thanks to our sponsors, Roka, that you can find on roka.com. Roka's wetsuits, tri-suits, swimskins, sunglasses, and other top-of-the-line products are trusted by world-class athletes like Javier Gomez, Lucy Charles Barclay, Flora Duffy, Mario Mola, Katie Zafiris, and many, many others. There is exceptional R&D and attention to detail put into every single Roka product to make you as fast as possible when that is the function of the product, or just make the product experience as great as possible when that is the product goal. You can check out all that Roka has to offer and get 20% off your order with the promo code that you can get on roka.com/TTS. And thank you to Zen8. The Zen8 swim trainer helps time-crunched athletes get more consistency in their swim training. When you don't have time to get to the pool, get in a 15-20 minute workout on the swim bench, or when pools are closed, same thing there, get in a 15-20 minute workout and at least you're doing something. The swim bench is a massive improvement compared to traditional stretch cord exercises because it allows you to perform the stroke in a horizontal prone position rather than as you usually do with just stretch cords standing up and putting a lot of stretch through your hamstrings and posterior chain. This means that you can improve your technique much better. For example, you can learn how to activate your core because of the swim bench instability element, and you can work on a high elbow catch, which the swim bench is of a perfect height for. And also, of course, things like swim-specific power and endurance become much, much easier to develop. It is not a big and bulky bench. It is deflatable and inflatable, so you can fold it up and store it. It stores very small that way, so you won't have to worry about space when not using the swim bench. Finally, check out the Zen8swimtrainer.com website for the workout library they have there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel and create your own exercises or workouts. Just use the ones that, for example, head coach Kieran Linders has created over there. Go to Zen8swimtrainer.com/TTS to get 20% off your order of the swim trainer. Now, without any further ado, let's get into the interview with Coach Emma Carney. So I'm here with Emma Carney, who is today's guest on That Triathlon Show. Welcome, Emma. How are you doing?
Hi, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to be involved in such a great podcast. Great to have you. Why don't you start with just introducing yourself to the audience? Tell us a bit more about your background and also what you're currently doing, of course. I'm not a big fan talking about myself, but I'm quite old. I raced World Triathlon events in the 90s. So the first race that I did internationally was the 1994 World Championships in Wellington. And I actually won it. So I think I'm the first person to turn up to World Triathlon, it was ITU at the time, and just win a world title out of nowhere. So I was ranked 157, or I had 157 written on my race number. And I then went on to a very dominant sort of period in World Triathlon for the next 3 years. I won another world title in 97. And I think in that period of 3 years I won about, I think it was just 19 or 20 World Cups, which are now the WTSs. So it was very sort of dominant. And then in 1997, won the world title again. 1998, started off the season well, won a few races. And then I went into a sort of a bit of a lull, and I was developing a heart condition. So I actually was forced to retire shortly after 2000 with a cardiac arrest. So I've now got a defibrillator, and I coach now, and hopefully I'm coaching athletes that will be world beaters in triathlon again.
Yeah, sorry to hear about that heart condition. I was reading about it, of course, and it must be really, really frustrating to have that happen, especially as you were basically headed for the first ever Olympics where triathlon would be involved, and it was in your home country as well, on top of that.
Yeah, that's sport. Sport has a lot of twists and turns, and I think that's the beauty of sport, because you never know what's really going to happen. You can be the most prepared you'll ever be, and anything can happen. So, the fact that maybe I was predisposed to a heart condition and I still managed to have such a dominant period in my career, and I still wouldn't change a thing, because it was such a good career and it's such a great sport to be involved in triathlon. So it did obviously shorten my career though, and I would have liked to have gone on and raced Hawaii and done more of the longer stuff as well.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned you're coaching right now, so can you tell us a bit more about that? What is your setup? Are you coaching in a squad environment, or is it remote coaching? What sort of athletes are you working with?
So I've got an online coaching business, and that is sort of more age group and a lot sort of more reasonably priced. When I first retired, I walked away from the sport because I was, disappointed. I hadn't made the Olympics. I, had a heart condition, and things were just really, really tough on retiring. But, as you work your way through these things, coaching is what I really enjoy doing. So I developed a website, online training, and at the moment I've got a small group of high-performance athletes. And I think at the moment in Australia, things are very, very complicated with regards to high performance. And I think coaching, if you do it well, can be really quite simple. So I try to create a culture of excellence around a coaching sort of coaching support framework. And, every session has a purpose, every session has a reason, there's no junk miles. It's very different to other coaching that's going on in Australia. And I think the results are just about to show. I've got some athletes just sort of going into the under 23 level. So it's a very interesting time in my coaching.
Yeah, that must be really exciting. Can you give one or two specific examples of what you would deem kind of complicated or suboptimal in general in the high performance coaching setting in Australia, and then contrast that with how you do things differently with your squad?
So an example of how things are overcomplicated, and I believe a lot of people wouldn't agree with me. For example, when you go to a race, you have a race plan. Everything's set up on, what you need to do. You have different alternatives in your head. You have options. You have everything planned out. And I don't really see that simplicity anymore. I see it very, very complicated. There's a lot of people around athletes. There's a lot of staff. There's a lot of different people getting involved, and it complicates the whole process. I like to keep things very simple. Because at the end of the day, it's all about you've got to get to the race. You've got to be confident in your training. You've got to know why you did training sessions. You've got to know how you're going to race this certain course, and it's all got to be a process. And if that option doesn't work, you've got other alternatives in your head. That sort of stuff. And around the simplicity of coaching, for example, I don't see a lot of focus on the bike, and I think the bike is really important. It's an hour of the race. This, we're talking WTS. So my theories around the bike is to be fit on the bike, because if you're fit on the bike, your run is not going to be as affected as if you're not fit on the bike. So I don't particularly take my athletes to car parks to learn corners and to do criterium races and things like that. I'd much rather go and do a 2-hour ride out in the hills fitness all the way through the year, 2 or 3 hours. And then as we approach a racing block, we bring in the speed, the motor pacing, the time trial work. So it's a lot more around what you're doing for each discipline rather than, like, we're probably still doing the same number of sessions, but it's what we're doing in each of the sessions.
Yeah, and that example there on the bike.
I'm not sure if I explained that very well.
Oh yeah, no, those are two great examples, I think, and the racing one I think is fairly. I mean, I think it's self-evident that if you as an athlete turn up to a race and you have maybe a lot of people to answer to, in a way they also answer to you, but it's just a lot of different things that can to some extent cause additional stress, and that's not good for the potential of having great race performance if you have a lot of potentially unnecessary stressors there. And then in terms of the bike, actually that is a topic that I have discussed with several coaches, and I am of the exact same opinion as you, that in draft legal racing, and I think it looks like it's changing a little bit, and people are putting more focus on the bike. And there was one wave with the Brownlees coming through, of course, where that happened, and now I think the Norwegians are kind of leading the way in a similar way. But I still see what you're seeing there as well, that there are a lot of squads that do a lot of cornering and technical stuff, but they're actually not fit on the bike. And you do need to be fit there.
I don't. A ride around a car park doing corners is not a bike session. That's a skill session.
Yeah.
So do that. That is not actually a bike session.
Yeah.
So I find that really, really puzzling.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, those are great examples, and I do want to go into your coaching philosophy, but one thing that I want to ask you first, because we just segued from your athletic career. So can you give a couple of examples of things that you think you did really well in your own career, and that you think that your athletes can now benefit from you teaching them, but also maybe 1 or 2 mistakes that you wish that you could have done differently?
Well, I've just written my autobiography on, there's a lot of mistakes in there and a lot of things that I did well in there. But I think something that I did do really well was the way I approached racing, and that came through a consistency and years of racing track and field, track in the in the summer down here, and cross country running as I was a junior coming through. So the skill of racing, I think I did really well, and I think what really surprised me, because I came from a running background, what really surprised me when I came to triathlon is that triathlon coaches were telling athletes, okay, if you're not in contact in the first, out of the water, your whole race is ruined. Now, I've seen people run marathons and they're not in contact in the first 20 minutes and their race isn't in ruins. You've got an hour 40 to get yourself back. So as long as you bike and you run strong. So those kind of processes where I don't just accept what the normal approach is, I think I do that well. What I could have done better, I think I could have been a lot more patient. I think I could have given myself rest days. I think I probably could have been easier on myself when I lost a race. So there's a lot of things that you can change as you grow up and as you mature. But I also think maybe that's what made you such a great athlete. Maybe the impatience was required. Maybe my work ethic was required. So it's really hard to look back. But yeah, with my athletes, what I'm protecting them from, I make sure they're not hard on themselves. So a loss is not really, really bad, because you learn a hell of a lot from a loss. And I try and make sure that they focus on the good things in every session, not the bad things in the sessions that hurt and are, where you're not making times. So I really work around that, and I also work around, you need to get your rest, your nutrition, that sort of stuff, making your life easy around training. Yeah,
great examples. And with that, let's move into just a little bit more around your coaching and training philosophy, what are the fundamentals that you think that most athletes need to adhere to when it comes to triathlon training?
I think the most, if we really, really make it simple, I think it's consistency. So it's consistency across the 3 disciplines. And specifically in triathlon, you need to, because you're always going to have, strengths and you're always going to have weaknesses because there's 3 disciplines involved. You must work on keeping your strengths and also minimising the damage on your weaknesses. So you can't get disheartened that, okay, I'm never going to lead the swim or I'm not the fastest runner. You can't focus on what you can't do. You need to focus on what you can do to make that less of a problem. And I think once you start thinking about things like that, okay, I'm not such a great runner, but hang on, what if I learned to run downhill really well? Because a lot of people in triathlon don't run downhill well, even the good runners, because they're like, oh, okay, I'll have a bit of a rest now. So if you're not a strong runner and you can run downhill well, that's a really good one. If you're not a strong runner and you can nail transitions, nail the transitions. So all that sort of stuff as well. And even little things like on the run, if you're not a strong runner but, a section of the run is exposed to the wind, draft on the run too. Makes a difference. So all those little things that you can make little time gains, not through increased training, but just by thinking about it. I've forgotten what I was talking about. But they were training philosophies and simplifying. Yeah, and simplifying things. Yeah. So I really, really love, pulling apart races and then putting them back together. And I also like finding ways of athletes, of getting athletes to the start line and being confident in what they're able to do and not to be dictated to by other athletes. And then there's also when I coach the younger athletes, an athlete that's racing under 23, for example, will go and do an elite race and they're suddenly racing athletes that are 28, 29, 30. So it would be like racing, a 10-year-old with an 18-year-old. And you would never do that in junior ranks, but suddenly when you're an under 23, you've got to do that because you're stepping up into the big league. And that's a really, really disheartening time. So I think athletes around that age really need a lot of support and explanation, and you're being beaten by older athletes, not better athletes, and sort of that sort of work around my coaching.
Yeah. On a side note, when do you think that on the draft legal side of racing, what is a typical peak age in your opinion for those athletes?
I think a lot of the girls at the moment are quite old. They're late 20s. I was 23 when I won my first world title. I do think you can perform really well for a long time if you get it right. So we see athletes, particularly in the men's as well, but we see athletes that come along and they dominate for a season, maybe 2 seasons, and then they're sort of overtaken and it sort of moves on. But you'd have to say that mid to late 20s would be the peak. And if you look after yourself well, you should be able to go into your sort of, you could push through to your mid-30s. But you would have to, a weekly massage, weekly treatment. You'd have to know your injury areas and you'd have to really look after yourself, recovery, and not do any of that excessive training.
And if we turn back to your coaching and training, so in terms of the general training aspect, what kind of thoughts and ideas do you have around that in terms of, for example, frequency of training, duration, intensity, and so on? Just a general overview of what you believe in there.
So this is going to be a really long answer.
That's fine. That's fine. That's what we're here for.
So so say we start at the swim, okay? And in triathlon, there's never one answer. you do have to some extent, work out where you're at. So you do need to do some sort of testing at some point. And, ideally when you first turn up with a coach, it'd be good for the coach to test you to see exactly, where you're lacking and where you're strong, just so you have an understanding. And even if you don't understand the test that coaches use, you can make your own up. Like you could make up something like in the pool, okay, 2100s, what can I hold? And you could do a short rest or a long rest. You could do whatever you wanted. And then you could see if there's any improvement over time. But my theory on swimming is I don't actually think a swim coach, a bike coach and a run coach will completely understand triathlon. But at the same time, I do think you do need to work with a swim coach, a bike coach and a run coach when you're young to get that pure technical skill developed. And when it comes to whether you're a good swimmer or a weaker swimmer in your training, that really, really affects how many times you train. So a really good swimmer might get away with 3 or 4 swims a week, around, under 20K a week. And a weaker swimmer would have to do a little bit more volume and would have to have that, feel for the water and develop that consistency in the water and develop just the fitness around swimming. And I think you'd also have to have, I'm not a fan of saving your legs in anything, because if you're going to save your legs, well, the race isn't about who crosses the line with the best saved legs. So I think you should kick in the swim, especially if you're a weak swimmer, because otherwise you're just going to be losing your legs. And on the bike, I think it's all about fitness, using terrains to improve your fitness. So I don't really believe in flat rides. It's hilly rides and things like that. And some working on something else I don't see a lot of in triathlon is gear selection. So I'm not a big fan of the what's it called? Compact gearing. I don't see the point in triathlon, especially it's a thing. Like I've seen athletes, they get a bike from whoever they get their bike from, and it's a compact gearing setup, and they ride that bike. And it blows me away. I can't believe it. So gearing is so important as well. And I do think that if you spin too much, you tire your legs for the run. And all this saving your legs, I don't think works. I think that was made up by people who haven't raced triathlon. So, for example, you can watch a simple one. You watch the Rio Olympics and you can see the Brownlees riding away from everyone, and they're riding a slightly heavier gear up the hills. So every time they pedal, they get bang for their buck. And it just goes against all the theories, and it's something that I used to do in triathlon, and I used to ride really strongly and run strongly, to ride a slightly, not a stupidly heavy gear, because that is going to ruin your legs, but a slightly heavier gear than the spinning. And that's how I coach the bike as well. I teach them that as well. So rather than changing down all the time, stand up and power over little short, sharp hills and things like that. And that's the kind of skill you only get by riding on roads, open roads. You don't get that doing it in a car park going through corners. So, and then my run theories, I've done a lot of writing with the development team with World Triathlon. So I think triathlon run training should be devised or based on the theories of middle distance run training. So what a 1,500 metre sort of 3K maximum a 5K runner should do, because I don't really believe you should train as a 10K runner, because we have all that volume from the other disciplines. So, but then it comes back to whether you've got the kilometres in your legs, and, you need to build up to these things. You can't just get an athlete that's walked into triathlon and go, right, you're going to do a middle distance run program, you're going to do some riding through the hills, and you're going to swim 30K a week, it's just too much. You have to balance it all and work out what does work and what doesn't work. And the athletes need to give feedback as well, because if an athlete's constantly feeling tired, like I felt very tired from swim training, so I came from a run background. So it's that juggle as well. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if that
I know that feeling I know that feeling of feeling tired from swim training. It's another non-swimmer, and it's something that on paper and in theory it's all well and good to say that you can do a lot of swimming because you can recover from it easily. You don't use your legs as much, and then you can go and do hard cycling and running. But that's not the case in practice.
No, your shoulders feel like they're up near your ears.
Yeah, and again, just personal anecdote, but I feel like a much deeper whole body fatigue from swimming than from any of the other disciplines, interestingly. But what you said there about training the run, like middle distance runners, that reminds me of an interview I did almost 3 years ago by now, I think, with Malcolm Brown, so the coach of the Brownlee brothers at that point. And that was exactly what he said and what he brought to Bridge Triathlon from the track and field world where he was coaching before, and trying to train them like the runners like milers. And he was talking a lot about the technique element as well. When you were talking about training the triathletes like middle distance runners, are you talking about more things like running form, or just the training element of it, the type of workouts, the type of structure to the plan that you're devising for them?
Well, I think all of it. So you're not going to run fast if you. Well, another belief I have is, and this is very controversial, is that I don't practice running off the bike. So I don't believe that you need to practice bad running, and you don't need to be reminded of how bad you feel. But if you're fit, I think you're going to run off the bike well. And I try that with some athletes, and some athletes go, oh, no, I really would like to try it. And they gradually move away from it because they're like, well, yeah, actually, you're right. I'm running well off the bike in races, and we don't practice it. And when I do practice it, I hate it. So, yeah. But with the running, you must have good form, good technique, stay in contact with the running track, so the athletics track. If you can, I like to keep spikes on for at least half of the year, just so that you've got that really good form of being on your toes. It does tend to rip up the calves and the Achilles, so it does get a little bit dangerous with injuries. But the drills and the skill of running fast, I believe, can only really, really be tested in a track race. And I like to keep the track races 800s, 1500s, if they're really young, 400s, 3K, maximum 5K. 10Ks, just because we race 10K, we don't have to keep practicing 10K. We're trying to get speed, so we need to shorten everything up.
Yeah. And so what would be a key workout on the run that you might do in the kind of competitive phase of the season?
Well, every Saturday, and I was very fortunate when I was growing up. I was at a school, and Steve Ovett was the world record holder for the 800, I think he was, a British Olympic gold medalist for the 800. And his training partner came and taught at my school in Australia. And so I was like, oh, wow, because I was into running. And one of the sessions that he taught me was a Saturday morning. They did their 1K reps, and he called it the 3-minute session. So they obviously ran further than a K, but you find a grass area and you run for 3 minutes, you wait a minute and you run back, and you've got to get back to where you started. And you do that out and back 3 times. So you end up doing 6 reps. And you can do it with a group, and on the way out, you might be in the middle of the group, and then on the way back, you've got to try and stay in the middle of the group. So that was kind of like a key Saturday session. But a key sort of track session would be Tuesday was always track session day. It would be something like I remember one session we did was a K, and we had 2 minutes rest, and then we did 10 300s with 100 float, and you had to keep them all close to 45 seconds, and then you had a K to finish off with, and that last K was an absolute nightmare. tended to fall apart on that one, but the first K was always okay, and then the last one really tough. So that sort of stuff where you're working on like holding a threshold or holding a faster than race pace, and then that hard, fast running, and then going back and then seeing if you can hold it again. They're the really key. But, I mean, with my younger athletes, because that's really quite a difficult session to get yourself on top of, I might keep the session closer to 400s, and, you know, we might do, 4 sets of 2 400s, and you'd aim for an easier one, then faster than race pace, easier one, faster than race pace, and a break between each 2. So they're sort of learning about changing of speed, because changing of speed is so important as well.
Yeah. And if we take the same question, key workout for the swim, what would an example of that be?
The swim, it depends on what kind of swimmer you are. But the swim, I used to quite like a swim where we used to do, and this was with a group of guys up in Cronulla, so, you know, you've got your Chris McCormacks and people like that. We used to do 3 sets of a 400, and that was on about 550 or something, so it was just sort of like a swim through. And then there was 4 100s on the 120, and then 10 50s on the 45, and I think we then went back through that 3 times. And because the distance, you know, there was a long 400 at a decent pace, not flat out, and then there was some fast 100s, and then there was some short 50s, and all that sort of mixing it up, and, you know, your body had to adjust. I found those sessions quite good. But then you also had the other sessions where, you know, you've got hundreds on the 130, 120 and things like that. They were always pretty difficult.
Yeah.
You know, you ended up doing 30 of them or something like that. So I think those kind of sessions are really good for triathlon swimming, because that's really what the swim is about, is getting up to a pace and then just holding it. But then, you know, the other sessions that are quite useful is, you know, might be 20 100s. They're on the 2 minutes, but do them all fast, so you get your quality in there. But, yeah, and I also used to like the Saturday afternoon swim, because that was just cruising around and nice and relaxing.
Yeah.
You've got to have your easy sessions as well.
Yeah, nice for a change.
Yes.
And the bike, you mentioned the hills being important, but do you have any specific structure to some of the sessions that you would consider key workouts for the bike?
Yeah, there's some sessions. So we always ride hills. I don't ever ride on the flats. I just don't see the point. You know, maybe after race day, if you want to go and ride down the beach, do that. So it's generally hilly terrain, dead roads, in the sort of, you know, wind. So it's just tough environment that's just going to make you suffer even when you're not pushing hard. So you're getting that fitness on the bike, and you're getting that awareness of what gears and, you know, how to sit on the bike when it's windy, and so all that sort of stuff. But I do like, we used to do some 5K time trials, and we used to have a road that was fairly flat but very exposed, and we'd ride out through the hills to that road, and it was 5K time trials, and there was little sort of, I suppose, about a 2-minute break in between each one, and then you do another 5K time trial. We used to do 4 of them, and another session we used to do was some 2-minute efforts where you're riding a too big a gear, but you get on top of it quickly, you stay seated, and it's all out for 2 minutes, and they give you that sort of power and that ability to sort of snap into things. And then we used to try and attack each other as you're getting towards the end of that. So you'd attack on top of an attack. And then when everyone became too tired for that, we had to get a motor pacer in. So they would come round us. So that's sort of top end stuff. But most of my riding is outside. I only ride indoors when it's raining or if there's lockdown.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's I don't like indoor training.
And is that something that you also advise your athletes to ride outside as much as possible?
I do. And, the indoor sessions are just hard and they're miserable, I find. I did triathlon because I love being outdoors. I love being fit. I love the outdoors. I don't do it to sit and look at a screen. But having said that, they're starting to do e-racing. So maybe that's where it's going. I hope not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually sure that that's going to be it's already quite a big thing, and it's probably going to be a bigger thing in the future. But yeah, it's interesting to see where that's going. Like, is that something that will be seen as seen in the same vein as triathlon or cycling, or will it be seen more in the vein of esports? Of course, you need to be like a super fit athlete to be successful at that. So in that way, it would make sense that it's sports, but at the same time, there are still kind of question marks around the fairness of it. Although now in things like the World Championships, they are doing a lot of things to control it. So it's interesting to see where that's going, for sure. So when it comes to distributing the time between the three disciplines, between the swim and bike and run, roughly how do you distribute the training time between those three?
That comes down to someone's background as well. But generally, I follow a middle distance run program and I fit the bike and the swim in around that. So, for example, with a middle distance run, you've got your Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday are the main hard sessions for the run. And you'd have your Sunday long run and you'd have your Wednesday midweek semi-long run. So I try and keep those sessions in there. Now, this is assuming you're at full volume. If a junior's coming in, they're going to do like a Tuesday track and they do the Saturday session. They wouldn't do the Thursday. They'd have the Thursday off or something like that. And then I fit the bike in on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I've found that the running helps the bike, but the bike doesn't help the run. So I don't like to have too much bike in there. If someone needs more bike, they could put it in on a Saturday afternoon, but I try and sort of stay away from that. And the swims are generally Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, if they need 5. So Sunday afternoon's off, or it's, that's when you get your stretching and your massage in, or if you can get in on a Sunday, so you're ready for the week. And strength and conditioning is a Monday and a Friday. So it's kind of, that is the general.
And sorry, I missed that. So what would Sunday morning be? I think I missed it because
long run.
The connection kind of broke up a little bit.
Yeah, Sunday morning would be a long run.
Long run, okay, yeah.
So the weekend is mainly running. It's got a swim in there as well, but it's mainly running. And, obviously if you can't train full-time during the week, that becomes, there's a bike in there. But that balance I've found works really well in getting all three disciplines developing well. But it's not to say that that's a solution. It's because, you do have a lot of people say, okay, so what do you do here? What do you do there? And it's like, well, I don't think I've got an athlete to the level or the volume that I was able to do under a similar structure to that. But, then again, I'm not trying to create me. I'm trying to create athletes that can sustain it for a lot longer.
Yeah. So what would the athletes that you have now that are training the most among your athletes, roughly how many hours are they putting in per week?
I don't do it so much on hours. I do it more on kilometres. So they'd be swimming around 20, and this is under 23. So they're still a little bit. Yeah. I think they can get a little bit more volume in, but then again, if they don't have to, there's no need to. So it's sort of got to the point where this is a maintainable level and volume. Improvement's continuing, so let's not push the envelope too hard. I'd rather have that consistency in there. So it's about 20K a week swimming. Quite often it's 15K a week. The bike is around 200. and the run is around 60 to 70. So that's in the middle of winter we can get it up to 80, but that's, a Sunday run is a lot of running on trails and things like that. So we avoid concrete as much as we can for running. I think another thing with running is if you can run on trails, it improves your running like IQ, because your feet, you have to think of where you're putting your feet. If you just plod down a road, I think that's very sort of basic running. But if you're running on trails and you've got to jump over a log and you've got to slip sideways in the mud and you've got to, jump down an embankment and up a hill, and I think that really lifts the level of your running as well. So that's another way of improving your running skill, the lightness on the feet.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think the point you made before, I want to highlight as well, that as long as you keep seeing improvements, there's no point really trying to push the envelope. Like I think that it makes absolute sense what you say there. There's no need to try to heap on more volume as long as the athletes are improving. Then at some point, if they stagnate, sure, maybe that's the thing you have to do. But I think that's something that I want to highlight for the listeners as well, that as long as you're seeing improvements on your current volume, then that's probably a good thing to keep doing that, because it can maximize the chances of you having really good consistency in your training.
Yeah, and I also think it's really important. It's quite often an athlete will say to me, but last week or last month I ran this far or I swam this far. And it's like, well, you don't have to do that every month, because if you do, you'll end up injured. And that's a lesson, going back to the start of this discussion, that's a lesson I'd like to tell my younger self. You don't have to keep doing what you did last week to be better next week. You need the consistency, but you don't need the volume.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's your view on periodization of the training year? How does training change between the preparatory phase and the competitive phase of the season, for example?
I think it's very different. Yeah, I think it's very different. So, for example, with the running, the volumes are up a lot more in the winter. And I really don't think you can train much if you're in a racing block. And you have to make sure that when you're not in a racing block, you've done enough training that's going to get you through. So for example, in Melbourne, we were lucky enough to have some local races, and I had an under 23 athlete, and she's done a triathlon every second weekend for 6 weeks. And in between, there were some A-grade track and field races. So she's been running a 1,500 on the other weeks during the week. So it's, the training between, and it's a 6-week block, and in 2 weeks, so not this weekend, next weekend, there's a race in Devonport in Tasmania in Australia, and that's a national race. So she needs to perform at that. And so we had that sort of 6-week block, and then we've had a bit of a lapse of, not a lapse, a break in racing of 2 weeks, where she's actually been able to put 2 weeks of training together again, ready for the last sort of national race. And it's really interesting that she said to me, I feel really good on the run. I'm really surprised that my legs feel so good. And I said, well, yeah, that's because you've been in a racing block and you've been having to sort of take that tiredness through, because we're trying to peak for a national race down the end. So I'm very much about someone who uses races to not to get themselves ready, but you use the smaller races to prepare yourself for the big ones. I don't think you can go into a race and go, right, I'm going to go and blow everyone away. You need to have about 3 or 4 races to get you really race sharp. And I think running's a really good tool for that, short runs. But yeah, so the periodisation, you've got to have the longer miles. I don't think you stray away too far from speed in the off season. I do think you need to stay in touch with it. Otherwise you do end up, coming back into sort of spring and starting to do some speed work. And if you haven't done any, I think you do end up being a little bit prone to injuries. So I think you do need to stay in touch with speed, and that might look like, 1K reps or 800 metre reps or 600 metre reps rather than doing the 4s and the 3s. So I do think, and it might not be on the track, it might be on grass, good grass ovals or something like that. So I do think you need to stay in touch with speed throughout the year, but the intensity and the quality, well, you shouldn't really say quality, should you? The intensity and the speed of the speed, I think, needs to be modified in the winter.
Yeah, that makes sense. And do you follow the same principle essentially on the bike and the swim? Do you have higher volume in those disciplines too in the preparatory phase, but you still keep in touch with the speed?
Yeah, the bike you can pretty much you can spend a block in there in the middle of winter and you can just ride your bike. I don't think you need to do too much speed, but you need to make sure you're working in a terrain that's testing you anyway. So it's creating that sort of fartlek effect because you're having to go up and down hills and you're not, it's like speed play. The swim, I think you need to stay very much in touch with speed. But the swim is always different. Like, you're never going to hop in the pool and just do 100 laps and say, "Ray, I swim 5K." Are you? You're always going to stay in touch with a bit of speed. So I think the swim is slightly different. You do need to still do your reps and make sure you're keeping those cycles in check.
Yeah. And a couple of questions around executing workouts. So let's start with perhaps the low intensity workouts, your endurance runs or rides. How do you advise your athletes execute them? And how do you prescribe them? Do you have a cap in terms of speed or heart rate or power, or are you very much prescribing an RPE that they should keep to, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, it's generally RPE, and I just call it time on the legs. So it might be, a 90-minute run, but it's just time on the legs. I don't want you to be puffed. I don't want you to be you should just have that tiredness sort of creep in on the body just because there's been that time. And sometimes as we approach, so you've gone through the winter and you've done your long runs and things like that. And as we sort of approach races coming up, at the end of the long run, I get them to do 10 minutes, and they might be just on an oval or it might be on a path, and because we generally run off-road, and it'll be 10 minutes, 15 seconds fast, 45 seconds jog. So they've been time on their legs, just ticking it over, and then they do 10 minutes at the end where it's fast, ticking it over, it's fast, ticking it over. And it's quite amazing how hard it is to sort of start to snap the legs back into a bit of speed. But I kind of like taking the body out of its comfort zone because I do think the body gets lazy, and the body is very, very good at adapting to whatever you give it. So if every now and then you shock it with 10 minutes of what, and not fast, slow, I think that sort of stuff lifts your fitness as well. But with the bike, it's time out on the bike. And, it might be a day where it's, okay, if you're feeling tired, today is a small ring day. Yep. Not a compact ring, a small ring.
Yeah.
But yeah.
On the run, just to give an example.
So it's, yeah.
Sorry, just to give an example on the run in terms of pace, okay, it might not be completely fair given that your athletes are running off-road a lot, but if you have an athlete that, I don't know, can you give an example of what an athlete might run for their 5K or 10K, or in a triathlon 5K or 10K, what their pace might be there, and then in contrast, what is their pace on one of those kind of easy long runs, time on the legs days?
Yeah, okay. Well, I suppose an athlete that races around 310K, they would do their long run around
for 5K or 10K,
4 minutes. So say 5K.
Yeah.
Because my athletes aren't that old yet. So say 5K. Yeah. So say that she's doing a 310. Actually be a bit slow, wouldn't it? 315. But she does her long runs quicker than 4 minutes. It should be around 4 minutes.
Yeah.
I think. I do know that I struggle to keep up with them. So it must be around 3:50 to 4 minutes, because because of my heart condition, I can't elevate my heart rate. So 4:15 is about as fast as I can go over a long period of time.
Right.
So it's under that.
Yeah.
But so it's, and you have some good days. Like sometimes you go for a run and you have some really good days, and I don't think a coach should say don't go hard. I mean, I need to retract that comment. They do need to say don't go hard when it's an easy day. But sometimes you just have a good day where the time on your legs feels smooth, feels comfortable, and everything comes more easily. As long as you're not straining to do that, I think it's okay to do it every now and then.
Yeah. But that's interesting because it gives us a sense that, it's easy compared to the race pace, but actually for that level of runner, even 3:50 to 4 minutes, it's not a slow jog by any stretch. It's just kind of solid endurance running, steady is what I would say that it is, rather than a plod. So which makes sense. Then you can do it with good form and everything as well. But also I do know that there are several groups on the WTS circuit where they would do their easy running quite a lot slower than that. So I think there are just different philosophies around that, and probably different athlete types as well. Like a more slow twitch dominant athlete tend to run their easy runs faster than a more fast twitch dominant athlete, for example.
Yeah, I do know a lot of people do a lot of, and that was probably one of the differences in my training with training over here. The long run pace, but I mean, you don't really know what, if you're watching them on socials or things like that. A lot of I'm not sure how legitimate the training sessions are, but there is a lot of slow running going on everyone's socials.
Yeah,
but that might just be
just from talking to coaches. I do think that exists, even though maybe social media isn't the best way to get an actual overview of what it looks like. Yeah. And what about the hard workouts? So when you have, for example, one of those track workouts or a harder swim set, what is your philosophy around that? Do you want, do your athletes typically kind of do a best effort and kind of go to the well in the workouts, or do you advise a common strategy that some coaches use is always leave 1 or 2 reps left in the tank? What's your thinking around that?
A mix of both, because some days it's time to just use everything up and have a hard day, and some days it's leave a little bit in the tank. The younger they are, the more I leave in the tank. And as athletes get older, I think there's certain sessions that they should do just to have that reality check. And I think those sort of sessions have to be done well away from race blocks, unless you're going for pure speed and you've got lots of rest. But there's occasions, and I think there's no real. This is the thing with coaching and with philosophies and stuff. There's no fixed rule. So I think you need to consider everything when you're doing it. So some days, the athlete might turn up. They might have gone through a couple of sessions where they're late or they're disorganized, and when you ask them for more, they don't have it. So there's something obviously going on in their life, and you need to sort of make sure that you're not pushing them over the edge. If an athlete's coping well, turning up, ready to go, why not stick in another rep? It's always, it's good to see what you can do, and quite often they go, wow, I never thought I could do that. So those kind of sessions are really valuable too.
Yeah. I think it's a good approach to have a mix of both there, and it makes sense that the older the athlete is, then the more important it becomes to sometimes do those workouts where you really push yourself to the max, because then you're probably closer to your potential and you need a bigger stimulus to improve beyond that, rather than when you're young, and you don't necessarily need to, as we talked about with volume as well, you don't need to do too much, and you can still keep improving despite not pushing to the maximum every single time. Regarding testing, you mentioned that in terms of swimming, but what testing do you do with your athletes in the different disciplines, and how do you use it?
So testing is, I think, quite often difficult. As an athlete myself personally, I was never happy with the test I did. So I'm very skeptical about relying on tests too much. I like to see testing and also data from training, and I like to look at that, and then I like to look at a race, and then I like to see why the test wasn't better, or, But having said that, I do take my athletes to the AIS, which is the Australian Institute of Sport, and we do, tests, VO2 max tests on the treadmill, and I like to look at the areas that I think I can improve, and then I talk to the physiologists about how they can improve those areas and test my theories. Should I shorten rest here to push that there? And and they're like, oh, yeah, that'd work. And, and then the next time you come in for a testing, there's a slight improvement, or, if there isn't an improvement, or if there's, a slip backwards, I think it's really important to make sure the athlete understands that, a test can just be maybe you're tired, or, sometimes you just don't feel good running on a treadmill. But, I mean, testing's good as some sort of base data modelling of your athlete, and as long as it's going in the right direction over a period of time, it's not always going to be, yay, this is great, because it's triathlon and it's not always great. So, and in the swim's a hard one, because the swim is more about sets and cycles and how easily you're holding them. Doing heart rates in the pool, I know when I was tested for heart rates in the pool, it was like I don't even have time to get the thing to your neck or whatever to do it. So we sort of just work on cycles and times and RPEs. But and the bike, obviously, with power cranks. Yeah.
Do you do any sort of testing with the power meter on the bike?
Well, we do, but we just managed to get hold of a power crank sponsor, and so now we're sort of fiddling around with gearing and power cranks, and one of my athletes is getting a new bike, so it's all when everything just goes, oh God, this is getting too hard. But it should be all together in a month. And then what I would like to do with that is, to do a test at the AIS or something like that in a lab, and then see what it's like in training, and then also see what a race is like. And then you can I think you can bring it all together. I think it's good to look at everything. But, having said that, if you don't have power cranks and if you don't have the ability to test, you can do a lot of things with a stopwatch, RPE, making sure the weather's similar, and do your own tests. It's very simple at the end of the day. You've got to get
Strava
from A to B
allows you to do some good.
Yeah.
Strava gives you some good opportunity to work on those segments and see how you're improving, if that is the case. Let's talk a little bit about age group training and coaching, because you also do that. So first of all, one very important question for a lot of listeners is kind of advice around how to fit in triathlon training around a busy life schedule with work, family, and making sure that you can do the training but also adapt to it and recover from it. What advice would you give there?
I really admire age group athletes, because I was very fortunate that, it was swim, bike, run, eat, sleep, race. So fitting everything in think you need to make sure that the training that you are doing is really specific for what you need. And it's not just training, if you're training with a group, it's not just training that's simple for the group to do. So you still need to stay in touch with your speed work. You still need to stay in touch with your technique and skills. And I do think, if possible, if, you've got your Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and they're, middle of the week, get your session done in the morning, because your day is probably going to go pear-shaped because you've got a job. And the other thing, I just had it just gone out of my mind. Oh, yeah, and the other thing is to also remember to sleep in. Like, give yourself some mornings off on the easier days. Apart from that, it's just a really, really tough gig doing age group and full-time job.
Yeah, but I do agree that's also kind of my number one advice in terms of time management, at least, would be primarily relying on morning workouts, because that's how you get consistency much better. I've seen it in so many athletes that are switching from being a workout in the evening person to workout in the morning person. Consistency tends to really go up significantly for a lot of athletes if they haven't been consistent before. Yeah. But I do like that advice as well of getting some mornings that you sleep in. What about
if you get your main session done in the morning, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, sorry. Go on with that trail of foot.
Well, if you get your hard training done in the morning, or your main session done in the morning, there is a chance that you can train in the afternoon, so you can fit in some sort of easier session or a recovery session, or you might be able to, have a swim on the way home or something like that. So definitely the way to go in the mornings, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What about the similarities and differences in terms of training structure and training approach? So obviously it tends to be a bit scaled down for age groupers because they don't have enough time as the pros to train. But other than that, compared to the things we've been talking about here for your under 23s, developing new stars of triathlon, so to say, and considering also that age groupers tend to train for a non-draft racing, whether it's sprint or Olympic or half or full Ironman, what are some key similarities and differences between age group and pro training?
Well, I think there's a lot of similarities. I think the age groupers need to still follow that sort of routine of doing, the intense sessions and doing the easy long sessions and the time on the legs and things like that. I think perhaps because there isn't that time or that ability to recover between sessions so much because they're at work and, they've got families and things like that, I think it's important that, maybe one of the intense sessions is removed, particularly in running. You don't have to remove running completely on that particular day. You could just turn it into a jog with some easy run-throughs. But, the ability to have treatment and, all that sort of maintenance stuff for age groupers is harder because there's just simply not enough time in the day. So I think there's a lot of similarities. I think they still need, regardless of who you are, you still need to work on your skill, your technique, your form, your speed. Got to make sure you're getting your endurance in there, your recovery. So it's about time management and getting everything done.
Yeah. What about differences for age groupers?
I also think, I think the difference is that the weekends become really, really valuable and really, really key to those longer sessions. So your midweek, which is, important for an elite athlete, tends to move to the weekend. And, maybe you can also bring it into Monday morning. So you could sort of have 2.5 days there. So it's, the weekend becomes really important. I think that's the key difference between age groupers and elites.
Yeah. And one final question on this topic. So if you have an age grouper training for sprints and Olympics versus one training for an Ironman, and let's say that they're both kind of in that 2 months out of their goal races time frame, so things are starting to get specific. What are the differences there? And one key question here, or sub question, is how much bigger do you think the time requirement is if you're preparing for an Ironman for an age grouper?
I think if you're racing for an Ironman, the time requirement for training is much bigger. And I do think a lot of age groupers underestimate that. I quite often have people contact me and say, I'd like to do an Ironman in 6 months. And I ask them, okay, how much training have you been doing? Oh, nothing. So I do think you need to, you need to have a bit of base. If you go and do an Ironman and you haven't given yourself enough time to prepare, you are going to end up hating it. And you'll get through it because you're that type of person. You'll get through it. But if you haven't done one before and you want to do one in 6 months' time, that's a really, really big ask. With regard to 2 months out for a sprint athlete, I think you'd start to look to races, look to, how can I do to start sharpening things up and speeding things up. So a sprint athlete, I'd like to see them do some races, and that might be some fun runs, or it might be some open water swim events, because assuming they're going into summer, there might be some local short races on. With an Ironman athlete, they would need to start, they should have already started, but they need to be really stuck into the thick of working out what their pacing is, what their nutrition is, what their plan is. They need to have worked out all the different, what they're going to wear, what foods they can keep down. So everything has to be really, really nailed, and you have to do that also while you're training at pace. So there's no point saying, I can. I had a friend, he used to like to eat fried chicken, and I said, well, how are you going to do that? And he says, I normally just stop and eat it. And I said, well, you're in a race now. So that was really odd. He hadn't even considered that. So you have to do all this stuff at pace, on the move. So if you have to choose something like fried chicken, it's not going to work. So, you've really got to think about everything in Ironman. And even little things like you've got to do the open water swim. You've got to be able to swim that in open water. I did a 6K swim once, I don't know why I did it. But about 4K in, I got seasick because it was sort of in the ocean. And I felt absolutely awful. And I thought, wow, I've only just done an Ironman swim. So you've got to make sure you've covered all those things off.
Yeah. Oh, that's all really great advice. So let's move into the rapid fire questions here. So these are just 1-sentence answers. And the first one is, what's your favorite book, blog, or resource related to triathlon?
Well, I have to say my book, wouldn't I? Hardwired?
Yeah,
or
you
my
can.
favourite book when I was racing. Well, I've just written my book, autobiography, Hardwired, Life, Death and Triathlon by Emma Carney. So it's a good read, I've been told, which is fortunate because it'd be very embarrassing if I wrote a bad book.
Yeah, we'll link to that in the episode description so listeners can go and check it out. I'm definitely looking forward to reading it myself as well. And you said you had a book that you enjoyed when you were racing?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Running with the Legends. It was all about the legends of running in those days. So this is really, really old. I'm quite old. And it was just stories about athletes and how they trained. So anything to do with that sort of background, that's the sort of stuff I like. Yeah.
What's your favorite piece of gear or equipment? Not compact gearing, at least.
No, you'd have to say a really nice bike. I'm riding the Canyon Air Road at the moment, and you just can't go past a good bike, can you?
Yeah, no, that's great. And finally, what's a personal habit that's helped you achieve success?
Not giving up and not accepting no. and just keep on going even when things look like they're broken.
Yeah, perfect. Finally, tell people where they can find out more about you, like website, social media, anything that, where listeners can follow you and keep track with what you're doing. And again, where can they find your book, Amazon and places like that? Or, all these things.
Yeah, my book's available online. Yeah, so I have a website, emmacarney.com. My socials are Emma E. Carney, and Carney spelled Carney. My book's available online. Just Google Hardwired, Life, Death and Triathlon, or Google Emma Carney autobiography. And I used to be when we were allowed to travel. I do a lot of work with World Triathlon Development. So if you ever want to contact me through World Triathlon, they've got all my contact details too. So, what I really love about triathlon is the community around it. And I'll forever be involved in triathlon. So if you've ever got a question, you just get on my website or get me through socials, and I'll always respond. So thanks for having me today.
Yeah, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much, Emma.
No worries.
I hope that you enjoyed that interview. As usual, you can find the show notes on scientifictriathlon.com, and you can find the links there as well as in the podcast episode description. You'll find Emma's website, Twitter and Instagram, and also a link to her autobiography, which is called Hardwired, Life, Death and Triathlon. On Thursday, we will have another Q&A coming out, so subscribe to the podcast if you aren't already, so you automatically get all the new shows when they are released. And then on Monday, I interview Leslie Patterson, who is a multiple world champion in Xterra and ITU cross triathlon. And she is also a coach. She's now retired from pro triathlon. So we will discuss her training and coaching philosophy, both generally, but also we will go into some specifics around training for off-road triathlon or Xterra. If you are looking for training plans or coaching services, you know where to go. Scientifictriathlon.com is where we have all the information about those products and services. And finally, big thanks to our sponsors, Roka, that you can find on roka.com. Go and check out their wetsuits, tri-suits, swimskins, goggles, high-performance eyewear, and prescription glasses and sunglasses, and get 20% off your order with a promo code that you can get on roka.com/TTS. And thank you to Zen8 that you can find on zen8swimtrainer.com. Use the Zen8 Swim Trainer to improve your technique, power and stamina even when you don't have time to go to the pool or pools are closed, and practice good core activation and a high elbow catch thanks to the engineering of the swim bench. Get 20% off your order on the Swim Trainer with the promo code that you can get on zen8swimtrainer.com/TTS. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.